So I guess I'm like a dog. Once I receive a little bit of positive reinforcement, I decide to do it again. Um, and I like this question, and it's rare to see this question. And also, once again, sometimes I do these because I want to underline something I've already said about things like this. And so, one of the things that I'm always saying about purpose, life purpose, is that most people are expecting something that's either connected to their work life when they're asking about purpose. So like what, some kind of career, or they're connect wondering, or there's some kind of exalted, they're thinking maybe there's some kind of hidden exalted purpose that they may have. And so I always, one of the things I always tell people is what you're going to find out is what you're doing is actually your purpose. Generally, what you're doing is what your purpose is, and sometimes our purpose isn't exalted and isn't big and isn't sweeping and global, but is specific to our situation. The other reason that I chose this particular chart is because it the implications are not necessarily positive. And I wanted to address that as well because, I know obviously some people here are interested in reading for other people. And so when we look at things that aren't necessarily positive, how do we how do we approach that with the person that we're looking at and or that we're dealing with? And also how do we approach that within the context of this question? And that's really why I'm doing it. So, okay, so the question is, how can I bring more alignment into my life? And alignment that gives me kind of a solar feeling somehow. How can I live my true life purpose? I don't know. It's about alignment. I don't know. It makes me think about the sun. I don't know if that's right or not, but I guess alignment, something. I'm thinking leveling and alignment. I don't know what planet might rule that, but anyway, so Virgo is rising, and one of the first things I noticed when I said that was, oh, how earnest. That's a heavy question, which of course they themselves noticed, and how earnest this question is, how earnest this person is, this native it seems. And sure enough, this person is Virgo rising. And Virgo is always very, very earnest about getting it right, or refining it and making it better. So about refining it and making it better. And the what's interesting, the first indication that kind of led me to think, oh, this chart is the answer to this question is maybe more difficult the answer is more difficult than the question itself. So then, which brings us to the chart ruler Mercury, the ruler of Virgo, is in the 12th house. We just did another chart where we dealt with the moon in the 12th house, and that question was about why can't I keep relationships or friends, right? But now this time we're asking about what's my alignment, and notice that I said that feels really solar to me. And here the sun, the Mercury is the ruler of the chart, is in Leo, which is ruled by the sun. And didn't we have something else? Oh, no, that other chart, Saturn was in. Oh, the ruler of the chart was in Leo. That's fascinating. It was Aquarius rising, and Saturn was in Leo. So I'm attracted to these Leo, these chart rulers in Leo, and so that obviously is some kind of message for me that I think I'll put aside for just a second. But note that we're talking once again about the 12th house, which of course you all know I like to use as the house of self-undoing, right? Or call this the house of self-undoing. And actually, I'm dealing up with a friend of mine who is who may be dealing with black magic or having had a spell put on them. And so I was talking about that recently and about how the 12th house is known as the house of the hidden enemy. It's the house of the what you or false friends, so that those that you do not know are working against you. And so of course you yourself are your worst hidden enemy. Sometimes you're not a hidden enemy at all, right? Some people are totally opposed to themselves within their own minds, and openly. But there are ways, we all have our blind spots which get in the way and are difficult. And so the 12th house can kind of be seen as kind of these blind areas that affect us really strongly, and that lead to our undoing. Somehow lead to our undoing. So they do the opposite of build us up, or create a prosperous, or prosperity, or joy, or those types of, right? Because remember, the 12th is the joy of Saturn, right? Who rejoices in lamentations and wailings. So this is our first indication that there may be mental problems, or I don't want to say mental problems, but there may be mental challenges, right? Or there may be challenges also with speech, with being able to say what I want to say. Um, Leo, of course, is about visibility, but here we are in a part of the chart that's hidden. So once again, there is, how do I express what I want to express, but no one's listening. I'm trapped in this, gotta dance, I'm kind of trapped in this need to express myself, but somehow doesn't work out that way. And we can see that there's also maybe hopes and wishes. The 11th house, once again, is being focused on this chart. So hopes and wishes, and friendships, so there may be problems with friendships and hopes and wishes. The sun really wants to make things happen, but then there's this communicative aspect that is trapped, is imprisoned somehow, feeling imprisoned. So that's the first thing that brought me into that. So mind you, I'm answering your question, right? I'm not just kind of doodling around like with the. I'm not just kind of doodling around with the interpretation. I'm actually answering your question, because the ruler of the ascendant is you in the chart. Right, so the ruler ascendant represents you. It's what corpus, which means body, vitae, which means life. Matter of fact, the first house is called the house of life, and then inganium, which means talent or skill. And so, this being a Mercury ruled chart, talent and skill is should be that should be focused on a skill, especially what kind of skill. And that might be part of the problem too, not feeling skilled enough, wanting to excel at something, right, Leo? Wanting to excel, be recognized for something, but maybe not being able to find the thing at which I am skilled, right? But there we have kind of a kernel of the answer too, is that skill is part of the purpose, right? So part of finding the ruler of the chart is part of finding the purpose. And whatever you find that the ruler of the chart is kind of tending to do, the tends to be kind of what you were put here to do. Then the other side is the moon. And now the reason that I it's the other reason that I kind of chose this chart is because the first thing that I was going to look at is goes back to our past videos about locating the soul in the chart, and my questions about, if we can locate the soul, does that mean that those same indicators locate the soul's purpose? And so, if you remember, we looked at Ella Fitzgerald and we looked at Jeffrey Dahmer, two very different charts, right? And we got quite a little bit of information around that. And so I think that we can say that the indicators for soul medievally, that Bonatti kind of, that we're using the Bonatti form, or technique, that those particular indicators can actually point us to soul purpose, right? So if indeed we're using them for soul, and of course those two indicators are the non-rational mind, which is the moon, and the rational mind, which is Mercury. And so those two basically kind of gave us what we could call maybe the contents of a person's character. And so the moon is the non-rational, would kind of represent kind of the thoughts and our inclinations and tastes, and the things, our desires, lusts, and things of that nature, right? Because it's considered appetitives, or our appetites. And then Mercury, of course, is speech and reading and writing and arithmetic and all of the things through which we're able to kind of communicate the stuff that's within that's represented by the moon, right? So those two areas, those two planets would then kind of, in my opinion, based on Bonatti, so those planets and the planets that rule them and all that stuff, which we may not go quite that far, but those planets would then kind of give us an indication, especially if you do want to look at the charts of Ella Fitzgerald and Jeffrey Dahmer, you'll kind of see the difference between what those two purposes might look like. So anyway, so we've already looked at one of the pillars of the purpose, and that happens to be the chart ruler at the same time, so Mercury. And then now we're looking at the other one, which is the non-rational pillar, which is the moon. And note that the moon is within 5 degrees, or looks like it's within 5 degrees, or she's within 5 degrees of the eighth house. So we've got a focus on these difficult houses. And so one of the reasons I talked about mental problems when I looked at the Mercury in the 12th is, of course, because the first house rules the head, and Mercury already rules kind of speech and the nervous system. So there could be issues with the nervous system, or and speech, or things of that nature, with Mercury in the 12th. Um, but also problems, as I said, difficulties, problems. And Mars is ruling the eighth house, but Moon at the cusp of the eighth, the eighth house is known to be the house of mental troubles, of troubling mental states, because it's the house of fear and terror. So, as opposed to also knowing about, being the house of death, but it's in kind of its more practical use, obviously it's practical use for that, but it's also in more kind of practical day-to-day use, it's the house of fear and terror. So it's the house of mental unrest. And so I'm answering your question. How can I live my truth? How can I bring more alignment into my life? If you've been experiencing mental unrest and you've experienced traumatic experience that have created mental unrest, because the eighth house is where the trauma tends to lay. And note here that the moon is in Aries and Mars is in Cancer, the ruler of the eighth, and the ruler of the moon. Mars is in the moon sign, and the moon is in Mars's sign. So there may have been issues of violence, or issues of contention, violence, arguments, all of that stuff that Mars can tend to represent. And note how easily that kind of, it could be with an older sibling, or it could be with it's in the tenth, so it could be with the female parent, with the mother. So, all of those things. Note also that Mercury rules the first and the tenth, but I don't want to get ahead of myself too much. But, Moon is obviously a significator for mother, the natural significator for mother, but that isn't where I was necessarily going with it. What I was going with was the fact that both of these significators, Mercury and the Moon, point to mental unrest and difficulty, and difficulty in that area. Anxiety, fear, mental unrest, and possibility of trauma, and as a result of possible violent trauma. Okay, so unfortunately, that's part of the purpose. Now, I do have what shall I say? I do have a kind of a more hopeful, a more open view of it. It could be open view of this situation, because I'm not here to just kind of dwell on what's bad about this chart, right? And if you notice, I really tried to stay away from saying things like, "Oh, this is a difficult chart," or things I fucking hate it when people do that, even though I myself do it, and but try to do it to myself. But in situations like this, as you'll notice, I really stayed away from saying anything like that. Instead, I just kind of showed us what wasn't so good. That's not what I'm here to do. Part of what I'm here to do is say, whatever difficulty you have gone through and whatever you are suffering is part of the purpose, unfortunately. Okay? As I mentioned earlier, there should be a struggle to express. There should be this feeling like I've got something, I need to be seen as something, or I need to express as something, or blah, 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 but it's not getting out there. That's the actual purpose, is because with note that the Venus is in the 10th, and she's in Gemini, right, which is ruled by the chart ruler. It says even more that this person, and even with the sun in the 11th, the sun in the 11th, that's a very good place for it. And so that says that there are probably um, dreams, but they're probably colored by whatever the traumatic issue is, because note that the sun is in Cancer, right? And so the sun's in Cancer, which is ruled by that Mars, that Moon Mars square, unfortunately, which we know probably has created some issues and problems itself. And it could be a male sibling. Remember, I said it's siblings. It could be a male sibling with which there may have been problems. Anyway, so that's my answer. So that's how I wanted to explore the answer to this question. Is that often what we find ourselves in is our purpose for being here, and we sometimes think of our problems as obstacles to our actual purpose, but the problems themselves often contain the purpose, or rather the problems often contain the purpose themselves. So in this particular instance, unfortunately, there's a lot of emotional and mental suffering that is a part of the purpose, and the struggle to find a mode of expression. uh, so maybe that's in helping others. So hopefully it should be, if you're helping others. Usually that's what we find, is that people who have gone through things that are difficult are able to help people who do, who are also going through the same thing, who are through a similar thing. So that's what I would think, is that at some point, whatever the suffering you're experiencing, you should be thinking about how you could make yourself a visible Leo, right? A visible, and Venus in the 10th, a visible kind of leader in that field that is helping others to heal that particular issue. And that's all I have to say about that.